few introductory words. In 1958, when my father was House Un-American activity in Newark, he was a lot younger than I am now. He was 45 years old, and he had a lot to say and a lot of opinions that he wanted to express. And unlike many people who testified before the House Un-American Activity Committee, he was the kind of person to be satisfied to say, I take the fifth and I can't answer any of your questions from beginning to end. Nor was he the kind of person who said, you know what, I'm scared, I'll give you everything you want to know. Instead, he did take the fifth on as you'll see, at a few points in his testimony, but for the most part, he used it as an opportunity to school the committee on constitutional rights, on civic responsibilities, and on citizenship. And I think that you'll hear that as we go forward. So here we go.
What did he do for a living?
Let's save questions till later, please.
Yeah.
Should we introduce who we are?
Yes, you go ahead.
So I will be reading the parts of Representative Edwin Willis of Louisiana and Gordon Scherer of Ohio.
And I will be Mr. Arens, A-R-E-N-S, who does the main questioning.
Right.
The committee will come to order and counsel proceed with the next witness.
If you please, Mr. Chairman, the next witness will be Mr. John F. Norman. Please come forward.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
I do.
Kindly identify yourself by name, residence, and occupation.
My name is John F. Norman. I live in Maplewood, New Jersey. I'm a printer by occupation.
A what?
A printer by occupation.
You are appearing today in response to a subpoena served upon you by the House on Un-American Activities.
Apparently I am.
Mr. Norman, when and where were you born?
I was born in New York City in 1913.
Give us a word, please, about your education.
I attended grammar school in New York. I graduated from high school in New York.
Did that complete your formal education?
I attended college for a couple of years, but did not graduate.
Where did you attend college?
In New York City.
What college?
College of the City of New York.
And when did you complete the training you received at the College of the City of New York?
1934, sir.
What was your first principal occupation after you concluded your education at City College?
Well, those were the Depression years. I worked as a merchant seaman. I had a job at a factory in Vermont with NRA wages of $13 a week. I saw an ad in the New York Times for a reporter on a newspaper in New Jersey. I answered that and got the job. Did all right with it. Got a raise.
Would you hesitate just a moment there, please, sir?
Yes.
When was it you saw this ad for a newspaper reporter?
In 1934.
And on what paper was that?
In New Brunswick, the New Brunswick Daily Home News.
How long did you hold that job with the New Brunswick paper?
I would say about 6 months.
What occasioned the disassociation of yourself from that newspaper?
It was interesting. It was a very educational experience for me, sir. I was covering a strike at a clothing factory not far from New Brunswick, and I saw hired strikebreakers heave bricks through the window of the factory at which the strike had taken place. And I wrote that in my story, and it didn't appear, and I was mad. I thought it should appear. It seemed to me an incident of the employer's use of violence against labor unions, of which there was a good deal of talk at the time through other congressional investigating committees of a different era, interested, I should say, in different things. And it struck me as a pretty prime example as an anti-labor use of violence, and I felt it should go in a news story. It didn't appear. Shortly after that, I was terminated at that paper.
When did your next employment begin?
I was unemployed for a while, and then I worked on a farm. I worked on several farms in and around New Jersey and Morrisville, Pennsylvania. I don't know if you're aware of it, but there are at that time big corporation farms, Heinz and Stokely's, that hired thousands of pea pickers in the season. Wages were 20 cents an hour for men, 15 cents an hour for women, and 10 cents an hour for children. I mean younger than 16 and 13. I mean kids of 7 and 8. Before I got there, as a matter of fact, before I went to work on that farm, there'd been a case. It's a very ugly thing. It was a violation of an 8 or 9-year-old girl.
Will you just tell us where you were employed, please, sir?
I did, sir, and I helped organize the farm workers.
Organize the farm workers. What year was that?
1935. 1935. I worked for 20 cents an hour myself.
We have one thing in common. This member worked for 18 cents an hour at one time.
That is one thing, Congressman. I hope we find others.
What was the name of the group you organized?
The American Federation of Labor.
That was a local of the AFL.
Local 1996 of the American Federation of Labor.
What was your next principal employment?
Yes, sir. I got a job. Yes, I remember. There was a strike at the two main papers of Paterson, the Paterson Evening News and the Paterson Morning Call. And hired strikebreakers brought in by the American Newspaper Publishers Association had taken the job of, I think, 100-odd members of the Typographical Union in Paterson. They established their own newspaper. It was a splendid thing, a weekly called the Paterson Press.
The Paterson Press. That is where you were employed next.
That is right, starting with the strike.
When did you begin with the Paterson Press?
Late in 1935, I think.
In what capacity were you employed at the Paterson Press?
As a reporter.
How long did that employment last?
About 2 years.
Was the Paterson Press a newspaper?
It was most proudly a newspaper, sir. It serviced the whole Passaic Valley area during the period decent people would not buy the Paterson Evening News because it was a scab paper at that time.
You began in 1935, and your employment there terminated about 1937, is that correct?
About.
Your next employment, please.
After that, I worked for the Federal Writers Project. I helped to write a number of the tours in the New Jersey Guide, some of which are in the public library, and I think they were pretty good.
How long did that last?
Oh, not long, about 4 or 5 months.
And your next employment?
I then began as an organizer of the Textile Workers Organizing Committee of the CIO, and I was sub-regional director for South Jersey.
Did you by any chance know Armando Pena about that time?
Did I know whom?
A man by the name of Armando Pena who was active in textile work matters about that time?
Let me say that name is not familiar to me. Let me say in general, sir, it is not my intention to identify persons. I hold a mighty low opinion of the informants. That name is not familiar. Let me say in general, I decline to answer anything as to the names of individuals. I cannot think of anything more reprehensible than an informer.
Do you apply that charge to a man like Herbert Philbrick, who served the government of the United States at great loss to himself and his family?
Congressman, I don't know what your opinion of Herbert Philbrick is. I know what my opinion of Harvey Matusow and others who have been proven to be liars is. I choose not to pick and choose among this breed. I think that any use of paid informers by a committee is a matter for the members of that committee to settle between themselves and their conscience. I'm very glad I do not have that job.
Do you apply that smear to all men who have served in the FBI as undercover agents?
I did not smear Matusow. I accurately characterized him as a liar. He is.
I didn't ask you about Matusow. I said, do you apply that smear to all men who have served as undercover agents for the FBI in the interest of preserving the security of this nation?
I think any man who attempts to answer a blanket question like that would be very foolish, and I decline to answer it.
You applied it to all informants.
Congressman,
informers.
is this a matter of my opinion you're inquiring into?
I just wanted you to explain your testimony.
Are you inquiring into my opinion, sir?
I asked you to explain your testimony.
I think it will stand by itself.
How long did you serve as a textile worker recruiting with the CIO?
I was an organizer of the Textile Workers Organizing Committee of the CIO.
How long did that employment last?
A couple of years.
Was that exclusively within the New Jersey area?
That is right.
All right, sir. That brings us to...
Excuse me, except for NLRB cases that I handled and negotiations that I handled that carried me into Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
And you were employed by a local of the CIO, is that correct?
I was employed by the National Textile Workers Organizing Committee of the CIO.
That brings us about 1939, does it not?
That is right, sir.
Kindly tell us now your next employment.
Next, I worked in a number of factories, jobs. I don't know if I can remember them all.
Just simple employment.
Well, Ocean City Manufacturing Company, Philco Manufacturing Company, Baldwin Locomotive. I worked at the New York Shipbuilding Corporation.
That brings us to about when?
Well, my employment at the New York Shipbuilding Corporation started in 1941. I believe it terminated in 1945. Oh, are you interested in knowing why that terminated, Congressman? I will tell it to you if you are.
Not at the moment, thank you.
I see.
Would you kindly tell us now, beginning about 1945, what was your principal employment?
I also worked, incidentally, as a bread truck driver.
All right, sir.
Yes, I got a job after I'd been fired from the New York Shipbuilding Corp., and I was fired for reasons that I'll be very glad to tell this committee. After that, I got a job with an ironworks in Camden, New Jersey as a salesman, estimator on overhead doors.
How long did that last?
Excuse me, I left something out. I was a radio commentator on station WCAU for a brief period.
What year was that? About 1945?
1945, that's right.
Were you fired from that?
Where is WCAU?
I think it is the biggest or one of the two biggest stations in Philadelphia. I believe it's a CBS outfit. I'm not sure.
Were you fired from that?
Yes, indeed. The sponsor was Sinclair Oil. The oil strike started. My policy was when I had 22 lines to give 11 to the company and 11 to the union. That wasn't liked.
Kindly tell us your next employment.
Yes, I got a job with an ironworks in Camden as a salesman estimator on overhead doors.
How long did that last, please?
Until about 1947. Would you care to know how I was disassociated from that job?
No. I am not concerned about that.
I will tell you about that. While I was a truck
Tell us
driver,
your next employment.
the man who got me fired landed up in jail. I want you to know that. He was a racketeer.
Kindly tell us your next employment. We are into 1947, I believe.
I see. After I'd been forced out of my employment, against my employer's wishes by Jack O'Neill of the Teamsters Union, who had exposed as a bread truck driver, who I had exposed as a bread truck driver, as a gangster and racketeer who had me fired from my job, although I was not under his jurisdiction as a salesman, who later wound up in jail and perhaps died there, I don't know. But after I'd been fired for that reason, I was unemployed for a while, and naturally, got a job selling air conditioners. I have a family to support.
How long did that job last?
Not very long, I don't know exactly.
Was that in the New Jersey area?
No, that was in Philadelphia.
And your next job, please.
Excuse me, sir, while I confer with my counsel.
Would you excuse me just a moment before you get to the next job? I want to get the date on which the last job expired before you start on something else here. That was when?
1947.
In 1947?
Yes.
And you were where?
You still haven't asked me how I was dismissed at a New York ship. I would like to tell you.
Excuse me just a moment. In 1947, the last job you were talking about was in Philadelphia?
That is right, sir. No, that is right.
What was the type of work? I lost track.
Selling air conditioners.
Selling air conditioners.
That is right.
How long did you work there?
Selling air conditioners?
Yes, sir.
Long enough to find out you don't make much of a living selling air conditioners.
Would it be a matter of a year, half a year, or
A couple of months.
a couple of months?
That is right.
Does that get us into the latter part of 1947, or still in the early part?
It's a little hard to recall at this point. Maybe the middle of the year. I don't know.
It would be your best guess that it might be about the middle of the year. Is that correct?
That is right.
All right. Do you care to confer with your counsel in response to the question about your next job?
Before he does that, you have given us a long series of jobs that you had up to this point. Did you quit voluntarily any of those jobs, or were you fired on each one?
I was certainly not fired in each one, but I want to say this, that any job I was ever fired from, let me say I can easily clarify them.
The employer was always wrong?
It was either because I refused to take anti-labor positions, or because I was pursuing what I felt, and I believe now is the best interest of people generally in this country, that racketeers have no place among labor, and I attempted to ferret it out. A New York ship, incidentally, where it was common knowledge that the horse racing and numbers racket ran well up into management, and where there was a garage, during the war, incidentally, during the war, a network of at least 100 or a few hundred men walking around with spotless dungarees and coveralls, who never done a lick of work, whose only tools were pencil and paper to take down the horse bets and numbers. These people reported to the people higher in management. When I raised the question of when I raised this question in the union after working 4 years, after a number of promotions, and having received my mechanics rating, after a number of promotions, the company was well satisfied with my work. When I raised the question in a union meeting, I was fired the next day. This was during wartime, by the way.
Did I understand you to say one of these numerous jobs you had was with the CIO?
Exactly so.
Were you fired?
I was not fired by the CIO.
Did you quit?
No. The organizing campaign was successful. We had good locals going in New Jersey, and it became necessary to effect retrenchment economically. That was the period of the recession, if you remember, in 1938. And the staff was cut down, and I was among those cut. I hold no animosity against the CIO for doing it. I was very proud to help serve that purpose.
In all of these incidents in which you were dismissed from your job, do I understand that you still think the employer was wrong in every instance?
Are you kidding, Mr. Willis?
No, I just want to know.
No. I cite specifically one instance, that of the Camden Iron Works, where when the racketeer Jack O'Neill went to the boss and said, "You gotta fire Norman," because Norman, when he was a bread truck driver, had taken certain action that Jack O'Neill didn't like, the employer resisted. As a fine man and good American, he said, "You have no right to force me to do that." When Jack O'Neill threatened to boycott his trucks and said he would get no materials, he said, "John, I'm sorry, but I gotta let you go." And he did.
You were fired as a result of this labor problem.
I was not fired, sir, from that job. I want to make it clear.
You said that you thought racketeers had no part in labor, and of course the committee agrees with that.
I was here yesterday, and I heard a letter read from the Carpenters Union. Is that the same union where the international president was hauled up by the AFL-CIO for racketeering and corruption? Is this the committee that complements your committee?
You told us about a character, Jack O'Neill, a person you characterized as a racketeer in labor organizations, and you told us that racketeers have no place in labor. We would like to have you tell us the names, if you please, sir, of the communists you know in labor organizations. Could you kindly do that? You told us the names of racketeers in labor organizations. Now, tell us the names of any communists you know in labor organizations.
Mr. Arens, I told you before that I will tell you the name of no person who holds what he believes is a political opinion. I will not be a political informer. I can't think of anything lower. we may hold differences of opinion on this. I would like to cite the fact that in 1800, when Matthew Lyon, a congressman, was elected to Congress from jail in Vermont in protest against the Alien and Sedition Act, he took the same position. I think it is an honorable position. I will not be an informer.
You just informed on the labor leader. You gave his name.
I hold a distinction between helping to prosecute a criminal and informing on a person's political beliefs in an atmosphere of repression.
Somebody who's willing to destroy this government.
No, sir. If I knew of anyone, let me say this clearly, if I knew of anyone out to destroy the United States government or Constitution, I would help to see that he was indicted and prosecuted. And let me say, incidentally, if I were the Attorney General of the United States, I would most certainly have taken action against the group of Southern congressmen who did a major blow against the United States Constitution in attempting to subvert the Constitution in the case of Southern integration. I am highly surprised this was not done. I draw a great distinction between a criminal and a political opinion.
Would you kindly tell us what your next employment was after your employment selling air conditioners in Philadelphia in 1947?
It is at this point I wanted to consult with my attorney, and thank you.
Go ahead and consult with your attorney.
Mr. Arens, I invoke my constitutional privilege not to answer that question, and I decline to answer that question.
How long did your next employment last?
The same answer, sir.
Was your next employment as a propagandist for the Communist Party?
The same answer, sir.
I should like to display to you, if you please, sir, copies of several articles appearing in the Communist Daily Worker. The first one from the Daily Worker, New York, Monday, October 25, 1948, headlined Wallace meets Pax Armory in Patterson. 4,000 persons jammed the Patterson Armory this afternoon to hear Henry A. Wallace and so forth. It is bylined by John Norman.
Let me take a look, sir.
Yes, sir. Kindly look at that article and tell us whether or not that is your byline in this Daily Worker.
Let's see. Wallace told the rally that the Progressive Party campaign for the ending of Jim Crow in America is an absolute must for the full organization of the textile industry. It is an absolute must for decent wages in the textile industry. So long as Southern workers are underpaid, he said, Northern workers will be underpaid. And so long as segregation and discrimination are the rule in the South, wages will remain low in the South and in the North. May I ask, is there something un-American or subversive in having written or bylined that story?
You are directed to answer that question.
I am asking what is the pertinency of that story, whether something is un-American. Specifically, I'm asking within the scope of this committee that is supposed to deal with un-American and subversive activities to have written a story, that story particularly.
That's my place.
I will be very glad.
I will be very glad to explain to you the pertinency of that question. The Committee on Un-American Activities is mandated by the Congress of the United States to engage in two principal functions, one of which is to maintain a continuing surveillance over the operation of the present security legislation. The other is to constantly devise needed legislation, make recommendations to the Congress respecting proposed amendments to existing legislation. One of the principal areas in which the committee has a jurisdiction deals with propaganda and communist propagandists. It is obvious that a person who is a writer for the Communist Daily Worker is engaged in communist propaganda. If you will answer the question as to whether or not, and give us a truthful answer as to whether or not you are or have been a propagandist, author of articles for the Communist Daily Worker, We then expect to pursue that line of inquiry by asking you about the directions which you received, and we expect to receive information respecting the tie of the Communist Daily Worker and other propaganda activity with Moscow and the international communist conspiracy. We expect also to interrogate you respecting the chain of command in the propaganda network of the communist conspiracy. We expect to elicit similar information from you for the purpose of using this information in order to better appraise proposed legislation pending before the Committee on Un-American Activities, a bill which would attempt to cope with much of this Communist Party propaganda activity in the United States. With that explanation, Mr. Chairman, I respectfully suggest the witness be ordered to and directed to answer the question as to whether or not that byline in the Communist Daily Worker is his byline.
You are ordered to answer the question.
That was a rather long answer. I would like to digest it before answering the question. As I take it, sir, you are saying to have written a story in the Daily Worker, a newspaper which no longer exists, which
The question is, did you write the article? Then you may explain what is in your mind. Did you write the article?
I want to know what I'm answering in reference to what the counsel stipulated why this is so. As I understand it, to have written the story in the Daily Worker in his mind would constitute fulfilling the function of a communist propagandist. Let me say, sir, in answering your question in the first place, I differ with the view involved. I am professional enough to believe that the First Amendment guarantees freedom of the press.
Did you write the article? That is the question, and that is preliminary to another question.
I don't think you have any right to ask any newspaper man any such question, and as for myself, I decline to answer it, because I think, first of all, it is clearly an invasion of the first article of the Bill of Rights, and secondly, I also decline to answer it, invoking my privilege under the 5th article of the Bill of Rights.
Next question.
Did you act as chairman in October 1947 at a meeting on behalf of international communist agent Gerhard Eisler held at Trenton?
Congressman, let me say I decline to answer this for the same reasons too, but let me say this too. If one had done so, let me put it this way.
Next question.
If any man were deprived of his civil rights, whether a communist from Germany or a congressman from Louisiana, I think he has the right to speak out, and I want you to know what I think in this regard.
Next question.
I lay before you, if you please, a photographic reproduction of Communist Daily Worker of October 23, 1947. Among other items, appears an item, Trenton mob couldn't keep Eisler from speaking. It states, Manuel Cantor, county chairman, Daniel Cohn, a member of the executive, and John F. Norman, Daily Worker correspondent and representative of the New Jersey State Committee of the party, went to Contemporary Auditorium on schedule to open the meeting. I am skipping some of the article because I am coming to the part with reference to yourself. John Norman acted as chairman. Kindly look at that article and tell this committee whether or not, while you were under oath, that article truthfully and fairly and accurately represents the facts.
I noticed that this article is bylined by a lady. I did not write this article, apparently. It says here, the Star-Spangled Banner was drowned out by abuses, and every time Norman raised his arms for quiet, apparently to hear the Star-Spangled Banner, the abuse intensified.
Gerhard Eisler was a traitor. Now, did you chairman the meeting for him? Would you answer the question?
Gerhard Eisler is what? Sir, Gerhard Eisler, to my knowledge, is a German communist. I repeat this, sir. If I were asked to guarantee the civil rights of any man, I would do so. I have no hesitation in saying it. I would do it for you, Congressman. I don't see why I shouldn't do it for Gerhard Eisler if I were asked to do it. Congressman, I believe that your question is an invasion of my rights under the First Amendment, which is freedom of speech and assembly, and I decline to answer it under my privilege of the Fifth Amendment.
Mr. Norman, Are you now a member of the Communist Party?
Congressman, let me put this very clearly as I can, because I hold decided opinions on these things. I am an American citizen. I have political opinions pro and con on a lot of things. Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and the Communist Party. I have no objection whatsoever in discussing these opinions, to telling people what my opinions are, private citizen or congressman. I have no objection of you knowing what my opinions are in any discussion of mutual goodwill and inquiry in which people are really interested in swapping opinions. Congressman, that's not the situation here. You come here asserting yourself to be an arm of the government, although that is in great doubt nowadays since the last decision of the Supreme Court. You bring me here under subpoena, you put me under oath, and you require me as an American citizen to submit to you my thinking. Congressman, that is not the way the United States Constitution views the rights of Americans. In my opinion, it is a travesty of the democracy, and in my opinion, Congressman, it is itself a subversion of the Constitution and the most sacred basic precepts that it guarantees to all Americans. I will not be a party to subversion, Congressman. I will not answer your question.
The only reason you refuse to answer that question now is because you are under oath. You are willing to discuss it outside with us when you are not under oath and when you can lie without fear of prosecution for perjury.
Congressman, that is an assertion that has no basis. You have no right to make it. It is obviously an ugly thing to say for the newspapers. I think they will have the decency to keep it out, and I resent it.
Is the record clear that you have not invoked the Fifth Amendment?
The congressman interrupted me.
You are going to get around to that in a minute?
When I do, sir, I shall make very clear what I do without your assistance.
Mr. Chairman, the record does not presently reflect an invocation.
The record will show I was interrupted, and I would like to continue what I was saying.
You go right ahead.
I shall, thank you. I said, as I believe, that I will not be a party to subversion of any kind. I repeat that. I think at the present time there are two tremendous dangers of subversion in the United States to the Constitution, because this is how I view subversion. One comes from the South, where the Constitution has been flouted, where even congressmen have been permitted to engage in a conspiracy against the Constitution, and where governors engage in the conspiracy to flout the decisions of the Supreme Court. And another, in my opinion, comes from this whole area of thought control committees such as this.
You understand, we are not accepting your reasons when we are asking you whether or not you are a member of the Communist Party.
I am giving you my reasons, and I believe I have a right to. I know the Supreme Court ruled your committee cannot do things which it goes right ahead and has done. I believe that it is subverting the Constitution and the decisions of the Supreme Court.
We have given you an opportunity to express your thoughts. We think we have tried to be fair. Would you answer the question? Go ahead and answer the question.
That is my first reason. And secondly, under the 5th article of the Bill of Rights, which incidentally is at the center of the Bill of Rights, and which I hold to be just as sacred as the first, and under the 4th article of the Bill of Rights, which guarantees Americans to be secure in their persons because of unreasonable search and seizures and the like. For all these reasons, sir, I decline to answer your question.
That was a very fine communist speech, better than I heard before.
Congressman, if you think the defense of the Constitution is a communist speech, I think you should go back to school and learn what the Constitution is all about.
Tell us what your next employment was after the employment which you have told us about.
Yep. I had a job as a salesman.
How long did that employment last, which you will not tell us about?
I think that is part of the same kind of entrapment. I shall decline to answer that.
When did you begin your next employment as a salesman?
Well, I see no reason to beat around the bush on that thing. I got a job as a salesman in 1950 or 51. I've forgotten, 50 or 51, I can't remember.
Between the middle of 1947 and 1951.
Or 1950, I don't remember.
Were you engaged in any activity, any employment concerning which you can tell us without revealing information that can be used against you in a criminal proceeding?
I'm not going to answer that question, sir, for the same reason I've given, Mr. Congressman, to my rights under the First and Fifth Amendment.
What was your next employment as a salesman? What did you do?
I did something I didn't like doing, but I have a family, as I said. There was nothing illegal or immoral about it. I didn't like it. It was high-pressure selling. It was porch enclosures, you know, the storm window jungle, you know. You have to do things to people that, in my opinion, you shouldn't do. I know it's part of what you say is an honorable way of making a living. I don't think it's a good way to make a living.
Do you mean to say you did things to people you shouldn't do?
No, I didn't. One of the reasons I quit was the boss was unhappy too.
What caused the termination of your employment, which you had immediately prior to your employment as a storm window salesman?
I don't know what you're talking about.
How did you happen to lose your job or become disassociated from your job, which you had immediately prior to your job as a salesman?
I think that's my business. Congressman.
Mr. Chairman, I respectfully suggest the witness either answer or invoke the privilege under the Constitution.
Thank you, sir. I shall. I invoke it.
How long did your employment endure as a storm window salesman?
About a year.
Next employment?
I worked in the printing trade and worked in a great number of jobs. It would be impossible for me to remember the names of all of them.
Has your work been principally in the New Jersey area?
No.
Where?
In New York and New Jersey.
Just in New York and New Jersey? Have you worked in any other states?
No.
About how many places did you work?
A great many, Congressman. When you're learning a trade, you have to bounce around. It's not easy when you aren't a young man anymore.
Were you
What's that?
dismissed from any of the jobs?
Yes, I was, for inability to do the work. I'm not ashamed of that. I can do the work well now.
Were the employers wrong in those cases?
Not at all, sir. I just indicated that.
Have you ever served in the armed forces?
No, I haven't, sir. I might say, by the way, that I volunteered for the Marine Corps in 1942, but it was up to my draft board that I was kept where I was. It was in a small town where people were pretty well known to each other.
Do you know a man by the name of John Gates?
I already told you, sir, I will not identify individuals.
It is our information that you are now one of the leaders of the so-called right-wing faction of the Communist Party. Could you help us on that and tell us whether or not you are?
Do you want me to be candid, Mr. Arens?
Yes, sir.
I don't believe you have such information.
I put it to you as a fact, sir, and ask you to confirm or deny the fact
I put it to you as my
that
opinion.
you are with these boys in the Communist Party. If that is not true, deny it under oath.
I want to stipulate on the record, I don't believe you have such information.
We are not asking for your beliefs and opinions here.
Answer the question.
You have professed that all the time.
I know if I had information, I would indicate its source and stipulate it if I felt it was important to do so. Let me say to you, sir, I think this is another form of asking the same kind of question which I think the Supreme Court has said you are in no way entitled to ask, and I am not going to answer, for the same reasons I gave above, the First and Fourth and Fifth Amendments.
Proceed, counsel.
Mr. Chairman, I respectfully suggest that will conclude the staff interrogation of this witness.
The witness is excused.
Thank you. And thank you.
Wow. It's an honor to preside today over what has to be one of the most extraordinary dramatizations of a real bit of heroism, and I'm using the word advisedly, and of great historical and I hope not contemporary import. We do typically take a little bit of time to invite questions. I know we're running late. If we have a few pertinent short ones, let's take those. Can the folks in Zoom hear us now, by the way? Ah, hallelujah.
Oh, wonderful.
We
Nodding
can
heads.
barely hear you.
Diane?
Behind you.
There's a microphone.
Turn this off.
I'm in awe of your father, but I wonder how you and your mother experienced this defiance. of
That's
his.
interesting. When this happened, I was 16 years old, and I took a day off of school to go hear my father, and I was just so proud of him. I really was. And my mother, I know, was very supportive as well.
Do we have other questions? Any on Zoom? I know it's running late, and I'm sure we could all.
People on Zoom, if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand in Zoom using the reactions button.
I'm not seeing any.
I see Catherine Rabineau. Your
Yes.
hand is raised.
Yes.
Have a question?
Can you hear me? Yes, I do.
Sorry, one on.
Totally oblivious, Jim. When this was,
Can you speak a little more loudly? I'm having trouble hearing you.
I was wondering, since I was totally oblivious in high school when you were going through this and your father was going through this, if you had high school friends who were part of your friendship group who were supportive or knew what was going on.
Yeah, well, yes, I did, but I refused to name names.
I know that. But you were not alone. You had people there with you too, psychologically. Yeah.
Yes, I did. By the way, for everybody's interest, Kitty Rabineau is a good friend of mine from high school. So, and I have a few friends from high school here, I see, and I'm appreciative of that. Thank you.
We do have someone on Zoom with a question.
Do you have siblings?
I do. I have a younger brother. He's 3 years younger than I am. I'm not sure how aware he was. As I said, I was 16 at the time. He was 13. No, he was 13. Yeah.
I see we have another one on Zoom. Unmute yourself.
Susan Mirsky, would you unmute?
There you go.
Yes. Jim, can you comment on the relevancy of your father's testimony and what was going on then to what is going on right now, or will you plead?
No, I won't plead the fifth on that. We've just heard from a really good friend of mine from all my life, actually, Susan Mirsky. And hi, Susan. I think that this is really relevant to where we are today. I think we're entering dark times, and I think more dangerous times than we were in then. They may not be personally more dangerous times to me or people like me, but I think they're extremely dangerous to vast numbers of people. I don't know how we're going to get out of the pickle we're in, but I know the answer is not to stay silent.
Elliot?
Back in 1956, I was 16, and the House Un-American Activities was on TV with Senator Joe McCarthy, who really looked terribly drunk. But anyway, my father decided that he would take many of the books on our bookshelves that were written by progressive writers and put them in a box and put them in the back of the closet. So that kind of made me feel, I gotta watch out. So I was wondering whether what went on in your case caused you to change anything at home.
That's really an interesting question. I will say this. we read a lot of newspapers in our house. We read the New York Times. We read the Newark Evening News. We read the Daily Worker. We read the National Guardian, and of course we received the Jewish News. And we got a lot of mail. We had an outdoor mailbox. And one day our neighbor, we lived in a development of duplex side-by-side homes, and one day our neighbor on the other side of the firewall, but in the same building as us, came to my parents and said, you know, there were some men here this morning, and they were looking through your mailbox. And I just thought you should know that. And both my parents were working at the time, and I don't even remember back then, there were 2 mail deliveries a day back then, when the mail service was considered important. And without being asked by my parents, our neighbors took it upon themselves to take the mail out of the mailbox as soon as it was delivered and hold it until my parents got home and hand it directly to my parents. And they, believe me, they were not in any way connected with any left-wing movements in the United States. They were just decent people. So yeah, it really, you know, we were very, very aware of it, but, you know, I guess my parents did a really good job of compartmentalizing, and we were under no instructions, orders. Nothing was ever indicated to us that we had to, in any way, hold back on what we thought. And I guess we were sensible enough to not go around and say, "Hey, my mom and pop are communists." But we got along fine for the most part. We got along fine.
We still have a communist party in this country, and it's legal.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's also very weak. I will say this too. I will say this too. My father was a very principled man. There was a time when I was in the Boy Scouts, and the local troop needed new assistant Boy Scout leaders. So I volunteered my father. And I brought the form home, and one of the questions on the form, one of the places to fill out, said race. My father wrote human and sent it back. And needless to say, that wasn't good enough for the Boy Scouts. I don't know. Maybe they were looking for howler monkeys. I don't know. But my father was very principled in that way, and it cost him plenty in his life. It did. It's why he didn't graduate from college at the City College of New York. He was thrown out for political activity. So he never did graduate, but he was still a very erudite individual. So.
Look at his progeny.
Thank you.
I'm looking at the time.
To learn more about us, visit our website, ethicalfocus.org, or email us at admin@ethicalfocus.org, and we'll get back to you. To make a donation, go to ethicalfocus.org/donate. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can watch many of our past programs on our YouTube channel.